welcome to this episode of the Clerico Business Chamber podcast, brought to you by the Ennis Chamber of Commerce. I'm your host, Joe Melody. On today's podcast, I sit down with Adrian Fleming, founder of Actuvio, proprietor of Monk's Well, and proud Quin man. Welcome to the podcast, Adrian.
Thanks, Joe.
We're sitting here in the lovely surrounds of the Monk's Well that Adrian and Diana has so carefully restored and brought into, I think, is it 4 businesses within one, is it? Would you say?
Yeah, I suppose the cafe, bar, and the guest room. So I suppose 3.
Yeah.
But, I suppose there's many facets to each one. You could squeeze another 4th in there if you wanted, but we'll stick to 3, I think.
Stick to 3. It's plenty. But so it's very fitting that we're sitting here in the middle of Quin in what is, I suppose, a landmark property, the Monk's Well. A big area that I'd always be interested in an entrepreneur, but especially you, in that you're in the tech industry and that you have done well out of it, but you've come back here to base yourself business-wise, even though you never left. Your early life must have had a big bearing on you, and even to where we are today. Could you talk about, you're in the tech sector, but what were the influences from the early days that brought you? Were you always a tech nerd?
Yeah.
To use that phrase.
Yeah. I suppose I always was a tech nerd. But like I grew up in Quin, and I was heavily influenced by a couple of main things. I suppose the first one was my dad, who was a mechanic, truck driver, and I loved fixing stuff with him. So I learnt logic from him, and the logic and the order of doing things. And if you do things in the correct order and the logical way, then it becomes much easier. And believe it or not, that's what tech is. Tech is logic. It's just figuring out the easiest, quickest way of doing something with technology. And like I learned that from a very early age. Like, and most of the time I was only holding a lamp for him, in the dark. But I was watching kind of the sequence of taking apart an engine and putting it back together. And then also I had neighbours who were involved in some of the multinational tech companies. Brian Nagel had a couple of brothers, a good friend of mine, and they were working for Dell EMC and stuff like that. And they were talking about stuff like around gaming, so building PCs. Like I think I built my first PC when I was 12 or something, 12 or 13. I was definitely finishing primary school, starting secondary school, but that was with their help. Like that was buying a motherboard, buying graphics cards, putting them into a unit, connecting them up, installing software, getting it to run, and then playing Doom, which is a great computer game. And then you wanted to play the next computer game, so you needed to upgrade the graphics card, and you balance that then with, I was an avid hurler as well, so I was a geek in one sense, but then I was going outside and I was pretending I was Shawnee McMahon, hitting the ball against the wall, 400 times before I'd go to bed,
Yeah. You were a bit of a contradiction.
I was a total contradiction.
A jock and a tech nerd.
And I can tell you, when I went to computer science then in UCD, I totally stood out because I was probably the only one in the class that was anyway athletic or anyway able to move.
Yeah. And the whole community thing with the GAA at an early age, and with Clooney Quin, obviously, it obviously, you would say yourself, helped you. It gave you that bit of a discipline and that drive, allied with the practical side of the tech.
Yeah.
And I suppose the efficiencies that you'd be looking for in tech. Do you think that it informed who you are as a business person? Absolutely,
yeah, without a question. And as I said to you, if I think back, any sport, but especially hurling and football, I think it makes you very resilient if you get to a very high level. It gives you that sense of perseverance and discipline. You become a leader whether you want to be or not, which helps you then in business.
Yeah.
So, we started, my tech company Actuvio, we started that in 2008, 2009, and that was an incredibly difficult time to be starting a business. At the end of the boom starts the crash, we'll call it, and no way would I have gotten through that only for the discipline that I had learned through GAA, hurling and football, and the perseverance that it gives you. No matter how hard you get hit, keep getting up, keep going, and you need that in business. But in particular in 2008, 2009, we were going to, investors looking for them to back our tech startup. and we were getting knocked back every single day, and you just had to dust yourself off and go again.
Yeah.
But it was through the GAA that I kind of harnessed that perseverance and that resiliency.
Yeah, it gave a certain amount of steeliness that some of your competitors in later years mightn't have had.
Yeah,
Might have
definitely. Yeah.
stuck it through.
Yeah, there's no question. It was, even if you look at the sector we went into, so we went into what's now known as, let's say, ESG, environmental social governance, but at the time it was known as carbon accounting. It wasn't very popular, and in certain circles within the farming community, as you know, carbon is not a very popular subject. I'm happy to come back to that because I think we have an opportunity to do it right, believe it or not.
Yeah.
But back in 2008, 2009, Obama was in power. There was a lot of talk about climate change. It was kind of a wave that was moving. I had always the vision that I wanted to do something good with my powers of tech and geekiness, let's say.
Yeah.
So this was coming along at the right time for me. I always wanted to kind of do my own kind of thing. So, started that, but then there was lots of external factors then that kind of hit the sector. Obama didn't make much progress on the whole climate change element. A lot of the legislation that was proposed was actually ripped up and thrown away. So that impacted the business. But, again, being resilient, we stuck at it, 2013, 2014. And then something really unusual happened, which was we started having conversations with chief financial officers in these large multinationals and the heads of investor relations. And these guys could see the value in, positioning their large Fortune 500 brands to a sustainable image. And we were front and center, because there weren't too many players in the market at the time. There were probably 8 globally. And out of a small Limerick-based office, you had a guy from Quin running probably the eighth most successful one, let's say, in the world, we'll call it,
Yeah.
And then you go fast forward another 4 years, and there was 128 companies doing exactly the same thing, and we were probably the top 5 at that stage, out of the small little office in Limerick, and it was a very it was kind of one of those things that we were in the right place at the right time. But had we thrown in the towel in 2012, 2013, I would have been full of regrets, and God knows there were times I wanted to throw in the towel,
But just in the point of the actual service you were offering, was there an issue with it, the whole CSG at the time, that you were actually providing a unique service for a problem that a lot of people didn't really realise they fully had? Was that an issue, that timing issue?
Yeah. So there was a few different things, right? So, the large multinationals they were more concerned about, less concerned about legislation and more concerned about positioning their brand as, for something that stood for good. And I tried to simplify things when I talk about this. So if you take, for example, some of the larger brands, let's say, would have had a hard time, like Nike, in terms of environmental social governance, being associated with childhood slavery and anti-bribery and corruption in Southeast Asia. That was a big issue for them that actually hit them in the pocket because their share price dipped. In fact, Dell made a carbon neutrality claim in 2009 that was done on poor carbon accounting, and their share price dropped 15% overnight. So the finance guys started to cotton on that, okay, hang on, this sustainability stuff is not only good for the planet, it's actually good for business. And it was those leaders in certain sectors, they took the bull by the horns and actually tackled it and went after it. And they weren't looking at the problems that it was solving, it was more looking at the advantages or the benefits that it could deliver more than anything else. And they were looking for the fastest, quickest way of doing it.
It was a bit cynical.
It was.
From their point of view.
Yeah. And I mean, the most successful period that we had was selling directly into heads of investor relations and CFOs. The sustainability teams rarely knew about the platform until we were rolling it out, but they could see the financial benefit. And then you had the institutional investors like BlackRock and Vanguard, who were just global behemoths, and they were mandating that they actually go and do this because it's the right thing to do. you will uncover opportunities within your business, and we just happened to be in the right place at the right time, as like one of the few companies in the world that could actually help them.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a bit of luck in that regard as well.
But was it very hard to have, when I look at it from the outside, you know, when you approach a bank or a lender for funding and backing, sometimes, you know, in certain sectors they can be reluctant, even though it's a so-called boring, ununique business. Your business was very unique, and it was a cutting-edge business. And sometimes the concern with cutting edges, it can be bleeding edge.
Yeah.
How could you have that conviction to throw all your weight behind? Like, were you going all in on it completely at that stage, or had you another? Was it a sideline, or was it totally?
No, I was gone all in, and in fact, what you talk about is very real, because like perhaps the turning point in the business was 2015, and in 2015 there was kind of an inflection point where, you know, the business was really stagnant, and in fact it was probably dwindling. And the VCs that we had on board since 2012, we had 2 small Irish VCs on board at that stage, and they were, you know, discontent, we'll call it, with our performance. And so if you're talking about going all in, like myself and my co-founder, Roy Meany, like at that point we went to the banks and we borrowed heavily, kind of mortgage-sized loans, putting our houses on the line, you know, to buy out those 2 investors. And the investors thought we were nuts. The only people who backed us were Roy's wife and my own wife, and they believed in us, you know. And you know, we bought out those 2 investors, and then from that, we challenged their logic. Their logic at the time was to focus on the UK. Brexit was happening, you know, there was a lot of stuff happening, and they were telling us not to go to the US, because the amount of capital that you'd need to burn to go to the US to sell this product, and the US market wasn't really viable. But what we did was we flipped it on its head. We used our sustainability ethos to actually sell remotely into the US. Now I know that's done a lot now, like everyone has done calls and all the rest of it, but go back to 2015, like we were using old-fashioned conference calls, not video calls. There was no Teams. Zoom was barely in existence.
Yeah.
Skype was what we were using, you know, and you know, we were doing good sales into the US out of that small little office in Limerick, when we were told previously that it was impossible. And that wouldn't have happened if we didn't get rid of the investors. But also, it lit a fire beneath myself and Roy, because the houses were now on the line.
You burnt the boats, you no choice.
Yeah,
No way of getting back.
we had to keep going, and we used to have this thing. No matter what happened, we would always just look at each other, nod, smile, and just say, "Just keep swimming, just keep swimming." You know.
My God. And as part of that, like, obviously it was on calls to the US. But did you make trips to Silicon Valley, or did you make trips to
we did.
DC or New York to?
Yeah, when things started to go really well for us in kind of 2018, 2019, we went over, we were looking at maybe expanding and, you know, growing the company to be a larger company. And we went over to Silicon Valley, we met with some private equity and VCs just to see, you know, what was the market like. We went there via Vegas, which was great too. But you know, ultimately where we settled on was, you know, we had a nice business that between Roy and I, you know, we had a lovely team. There was about 30 of us. Everyone was enjoying working there. We didn't want that to change. You know, we were growing by about, you know, 100 to 200% per year, depending on the year that you look at. It was enjoyable work, doing stuff for people that really and truly loved what we did. We were one of the best out there doing it. So we just didn't really want the thing to change, you know. And then, you know, more and more companies started getting into the space, and ultimately we were still a leader, so we were well able to, you know, beat off competition. But, you know, you'd always be kind of worried that, you know, somebody like a big Microsoft or a big Google would come along and they would just, you know, wipe the floor with you. So that's when kind of some of the bigger players kind of started knocking on the door, like NASDAQ, for example. They came knocking at the door with a very interesting offer for us to join them as part of an acquisition, and that was an exit that would have been, you know, unbelievable. And we said no. and will probably be always known as the guys who said no to NASDAQ, you know. And again, you know, most people thought we were mad until, you know, I think it was about 12 months later, we did much better out of an exit with Diligent.
Yeah.
You know, but our business had grown considerably in that 12 months. So, you know, were we foolish or were we patient? You know, I'd like to think that we were patient.
Yeah.
But, you know, sometimes you can come out on the wrong side of those decisions too, you know, and regret them. But the timing for us was perfect. You know, like we were trying to hire, we had 25 open positions, and we were hiring at maybe a rate of 2 per month, and we were struggling. I was building a house back here in Quin. We had just a newborn in the house. Diana was teaching not only her own kids remotely because she was a primary school teacher, but she was also trying to educate the 2 older ones because we were all housebound during COVID. You know,
You had a lot on.
something needed to change, you know. So it just happened at the right time. We just, like, I was working literally, I was probably sleeping 2 or 3 hours a day, and I did that for 7 months. That was just the extent of the challenge. You know, we just couldn't keep up.
Do you think that startups, well, especially because we're in the tech sector, do you think the young entrepreneurs that are coming to realise the trade-offs that, you know, you come here today, the sun is shining, you have a lovely business set up in your home area, it's kind of like, it's crowning achievement, I suppose. It's something that's very tangible and you can see it in front of you. But do you think sometimes the tech sector is a bit glamorised that, you know, to someone who doesn't know anything about it, you sit down your nice laptop and you do whatever, hey presto, you have a company. You hear about it with AI now, you can set up AI companies and all this sort of stuff. But do you think people realise the trade-offs that it takes to get to a decent level, not the level you're at even, that there's a human cost as well as the actual financial side of it?
But there is, absolutely. Like, there's sacrifice. Do you know, you get out of things, you know, as much as you put into them. You know, and I think the younger generation, and you don't even have to be too much younger than me, like, but there's guys who think that it can be just turned on, you know, and that it just happens, and that there's some magic. But really and truly, there's probably, you know, 10,000 steps that you need to take in order to get there, and each step can bring you in the wrong direction.
Yes.
And it's just getting as many of those steps into the right direction as possible within the shortest period of time. But you can't do them if you're sleeping.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
you can't do them if you're off golfing or off, you know, doing. So you have to be focused. You have to be in the moment. You have to be concentrating. Like, and you're never off.
Yeah.
Like for me, in the period between 2008 2009, let's say, it started it through to when we sold in 2021. Actually, there's a classic story when I was on my honeymoon, and went on honeymoon in 2012, knowing that well, I knew, nobody else knew, but that when I came back from honeymoon, I was going to have to shut the company down because it was just simply cash flow, clients pulling out because of double dip recession in the UK. So I was on my honeymoon, trying to keep this to myself. I had my best man at my wedding praise me about the company and say how great it was going. And I'm standing there beside him, or sitting there beside him, knowing that when I come back from honeymoon, I have to shut this thing down. You know, this is going to be embarrassing. But I had kind of resigned to it. I couldn't see a way out of it. The investors were not going to support us any further. And it was coming to an end. But as I said, you're always on. Your brain is always working. At that moment in time, because I had resigned to it, I went on the honeymoon and I said, right, okay, just enjoy the holiday, get back and just do what has to be done and start fresh. But while I was sitting on the beach out there enjoying the sun, a bit of R&R, probably the first time I had actually relaxed in about 3 or 4 years, it was on the second last day of the holiday that I kind of had a eureka moment. And so I went back to the accommodation and I took out the phone out of the safe, which is where I promised it would be locked during the course of the couple of weeks, and I made a phone call to a guy in London, and I kind of threw an idea at him of licensing our software as a white label thing to him, and he nearly bit my hand off because I knew that they had a problem that we could solve. And so basically that was a 400k per year license deal that I did on the phone, pretty much, from a sunspot, and rescued the company. But I would not have come up with that idea if I didn't go on honeymoon, because the brain wouldn't have figured it out. It wasn't until I was at full relaxation that I actually allowed the brain to think, and it actually came up with a solution for me.
And you were also in the middle of the problem. You had to get outside of it.
Yeah,
physically, nearly.
absolutely. Yeah.
My God.
So that rescued the company, and then the rest is history. But
And the part where it comes to the exit, or the liquidity day, or all these nice phrases that people use for it. From my business, where you're buying and selling cattle, or you're maybe buying a bit of land or selling land, it's straightforward. How straightforward is it? Like, is there a very structured system of putting a price on the company, and just getting the right buyer also? Because you were selling your baby.
Yeah.
You turned down NASDAQ. You obviously had the right buyer somewhere in mind, maybe.
Yeah.
In the back of your head, who would be suitable to take it on.
Yeah, I suppose there was a few things that led us to the decision. Like Diligent were building an office in Galway at the time, and it was I think it's one of Europe's most sustainable buildings as well. So that was attractive. So I knew that they had kind of sustainability at their core, and that they had the right mantra, and it would be a good place for the team that I cared deeply about, to go and work and build careers for themselves, because a lot of them had hit a kind of a ceiling within IQVIO. They couldn't go any further or any higher because, well, then they'd be taking my job, So, so there was kind of, it was a good fit from a number of different perspectives, but also for the transition period, there would be no transatlantic flights. It would be just up to Galway, which was grand,
Yeah.
And, that was a good fit, but also I think the timing was key. And I think Diligent were on a very upward curve in terms of governance, risk and compliance as well, and I just thought that we joining with their product would make a superior product that we could bring to market, and it would do some good. And they had 21,000 clients that needed our product as well, so I just wanted that baby to grow, and I wanted to put it where it was going so that it could succeed. And it just seemed to be the best position at that point in time.
And the whole exit piece, is there an awkwardness now around, are people hyper curious about it, and is there kind of an awkwardness that they're afraid to even talk about it?
There is, yeah. Look, a lot of my close
The
friends.
whispers.
Yeah, look, they all know, your man, he was a software geek and did well out of it, and went off and bought a pub, and renovated and does all those crazy things, and there is that. And my best mates, my friends, they know the story. And even after the exit, I brought all my close friends to Tomorrowland in Belgium, 5 stars, and chauffeur driving them in and out to the event. And at the end of it, I was like, right, lads, thanks a million for being on the journey with me. Thanks for your patience, and it was the best. It was 4 days of just non-stop partying, and it was just brilliant, And I suppose the curiosity is always going to be there, but I think what people don't see is all the hard work that went on behind it. So it was the exit was great, but the sacrifices that went into it, the pain, the misery, the misfortune, the risk taken, I don't think people appreciate all of that. But I think the other side of it then is when we took on this project here in the Monk's Well, I think people had a different opinion of what would happen. Is Adrian going to be involved? And I think seeing me around the place in a pair of Snickers trousers and a Kango hammer, I think surprised a lot of people. And I was probably more dangerous than helpful, to be honest. But I was here. I was hands on. And I had no experience, neither myself or my wife Diana, we had no experience in the hospitality sector, so we were learning on the hoof, and I poured my first pint on the Thursday night before we opened the pub, and
have you many poured in between?
Yeah, I have now, yeah. Well, it's funny, on the first few opening weekends, the place here was just heaving, it was mobbed, and I was in behind the bar more than I ever thought I would, and I got kind of good at it eventually, but for the first few weeks, you'd have some of the lads who'd know me and I'd go to them behind the bar and be like, are you alright, or is somebody looking after you? And they'd lie, they'd be like, I'm grand, somebody else is looking after me. And then I'd turn my back and they'd be just like, actually, yeah, 2 pints of Heineken there, you know, because they knew that I was really bad at pouring Heineken in particular, you know. I was grand at doing Guinness and stuff, and if anybody started asking for fancy shots and stuff, I'd just point them at one of the other bar staff. But yeah, they were avoiding me for a while, you know, and I think now they're kind of coming around to maybe that I'm able to do an acceptable one for them, like, you know. But look, it was all part and parcel of the fun of it, you know.
Part of the journey of it.
Yeah.
And in terms of life after the exit, I don't want to harp on too much about it, but it was a huge milestone, a milestone that most people statistically never get to.
Yeah.
Did it change you? Like, I don't mean did the money change you, but sometimes I feel that when you meet someone who's been so successful, and you were successful quite young, they carry themselves differently. They have a glow off them, they have an aura. You seem to be a naturally confident kind of a man.
Jakers.
Were you always that way, or do you see any changes in yourself or the people around you since you had that liquidity day?
I'd like to think no is the answer. Inevitably there's probably been some changes, but I'm probably the wrong person to ask. You know, I'd probably need to ask my sister, who'd give me a very clear definitive answer on that, I can tell you.
Yeah.
Look, we've 3 small kids at home, you know, so one of the things that's very important for me is that they grow up normal.
Yeah.
They're very privileged, but we try not to spoil them. I can guarantee you they'll be the last ones to get phones or PlayStations, and if they're listening to this, I'm sorry, guys. But, you know, we try to keep them grounded as best as possible. One of the great things about the Monks Well here is that they see hard graft. You know, they don't see Dad driving around the lawnmower 3 or 4 times a week, you know, which is the way I was occupying my time after the exit for a long time. They see us here, you know, working hard, you know, going through everything from accounts to ordering to actually being in behind the bar, thinking about the next thing, the next event, the next, you know, the next project, let's say. And they see that, and they see the amount of time we put into it, both here and outside. And I think that's invaluable for them to see that. And I'd like to think that they're grounded, and they see how hard we work here at the Monks. And they see, you know, they're learning a lot. Like, they're learning an awful lot about business, even just by listening to us talking in the car.
Yeah.
You know, and that for me is very important. Like, you know, myself and Diana, like, we're very grounded. We came from humble backgrounds, like, and you know, we didn't come from business backgrounds. But I think it's important for us that our kids, you know, are humble and are polite and don't grow up with a silver spoon in their.
Yeah, 100%.
You know, has it changed us? I don't know, is the honest answer. I'd like to think that we've done good. We've done, like, everyone makes mistakes, but I'd like to think that we've done more good than anything else.
Yeah.
You know, being involved in the GA club, you know, we've tried to back some good charities, good companies. Like, there's a company I'm particularly fond of which deals in female leadership, and I'm thinking of my daughter in that regard.
Yes.
And that's Kella, run by Hannah Rickson down in 6 Mile Bridge, and you know, they're doing some great things for female leadership, and you know, we're proud to be, you know, backing them. And there's the Carbon Space guys, again, living in a rural community. Agriculture is kind of something that I didn't grow up in, but sitting across from an avid farmer, I suppose I have to say it, you know, but like, you know, my skills are in, my knowledge is in carbon and sustainability. So I'm back in, you know, a company called Carbon Space that they're using AI to quantify carbon sequestration in Southeast Asian farms.
Yep.
You know, and that technology can be directly translated back to Ireland if it's advanced enough. And right now, like, we're waiting on these things called carbon flux towers to be deployed in a palm oil plantation in Southeast Asia. We're hoping that the data that comes back from that, when we combine that with satellite imagery, that we can quantify it. But you could apply the same in theory to the bogs of Ireland, quantify that, and then give the benefit back to the farming community. But like, we're probably 5-10 years away from that. But again, trying to do good through tech in probably indirect ways.
But you have a certain ethic about you in terms of definitely the environment, but I think you could wrap the community in it also. And I think, unfortunately, just as an observer from the outset, some of the ESG in recent years, there has been some greenwashing with some companies, and it has been very disingenuous. And I can see with you that you kind of started with the doing good part ahead of nearly doing well part, and it seems to have led you unusually to a place where you've done very well out of it. Do you think that all that you've achieved, do you think Ireland as a country, is it a good country to do business and to start from basically scratch like you did?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I suppose if we look at it from a tech startup perspective, like the hardest part to overcome in Ireland is different to the hardest part to overcome in other countries. The hardest part in Ireland is actually that initial seed capital, that initial few quid that you need to get the idea to a prototype stage. That tends to be very difficult to achieve unless you've got wealthy friends or family. That's where a lot of people give up. And unfortunately, the graveyard of ideas in Ireland is very significant. In the US, for example, it's not so much. Like you would, the environment in the US is a lot more entrepreneurial in that they will take a punt, as they call it, on, a startup, a scrappy startup, an idea that's written on the back of a handkerchief kind of thing.
Yeah.
Whereas in Ireland, to get seed capital, and I mean, the other thing as well is seed capital in the US is much bigger than, let's say, seed capital in Ireland. Seed capital in Ireland could be anything from $5,000 to, $500,000, we'll say. Whereas in the US, it's very different. And you've got this concept of pre-seed as well, which you increasingly hear about. But it's just our risk appetite for startups and the understanding of tech in Ireland isn't perhaps as advanced as we would like to think it is. When you go to even the UK, in certain respects, the UK is actually ahead of us in terms of supporting startups. Certainly their tax regime is far more advanced in that it encourages people to invest in startups. Like people, and you're talking about mom and pops, like people who might have 50 or 60k in the bank that they might put it into their son's startup or something like that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that they will get a tax incentive to do so. Now we have got some things in Ireland.
EIS.
EIS, and there's a few others as well. But there's a lot of hoops to jump through as well. I understand. Like there's one particular scheme that I thought I would be able to take advantage of for my own new startup, Atema, and it turned out that the hoops that I would have to jump through would actually damage other businesses that I was involved in. So I couldn't.
Yeah.
There's a lot of headline figures of available grants and schemes and things, but when you get into the fine detail, that they actually they preclude a lot of people, and maybe we need a broader stroke brush to help startups get over that initial phase. So that's from a tech startup perspective. If you look at it from, I suppose uniquely now I have visibility into the hospitality sector, which is a lot more challenging on a day-to-day basis. But in some respects, a hospitality business is easier to start than a tech startup, and a lot of people would think it's the opposite. But there's very few supports. The Leo are very good in many respects, and I'd be a big fan of the Leo, and they've done lots for me down through the years as well. But in terms of like the hospitality sector, I think the hospitality sector is probably one of the hardest sectors to get something to work, and it's very unforgiving in that there's probably let's say 50, 60 things you need to keep an eye on, and if one of those things goes a little bit awry, you could be months recovering from it. Whereas within the software sector, you're probably keeping an eye on 5 to 10 big things. If one of them goes wrong, you're sunk. But it's probably 5 to 10 things that within reason one individual can keep an eye on.
It's easier to keep your hands under those few things, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's an interesting thing, and I'm still learning. I'm only less than 12 months into the hospitality sector, and I'm learning every day. But whereas the software stuff comes second nature to me, the hospitality stuff is something I'm learning, and I just think that I take my hat off to anybody who has done multiple hospitality businesses over time and has done it successfully. I think that takes incredible ability, and I often wonder, if you had half of those people in the hospitality sector point their talents into tech, what would they have done? With the same level of attention to detail,
But are we in Ireland? Is it, the lending is one piece and the regulatory landscape is one piece, but even looking back on your own journey, are we a little bit too risk averse? I often meet people in business and SMEs that they're afraid. They have a great idea and they are already trading, like you said about hospitality. They already have the asset and they have the history, but they're afraid to push on and spend money in what they know they're good at.
Yeah.
Like, would your advice be to, I don't know, my young entrepreneur anymore, but youngish entrepreneur, that if you have something good that's provable and repeatable, to drive on and maybe, set your sights a little bit higher?
Of course, would be my answer there. It depends as well on the individual and what you want out of life. For some people, pushing on the business isn't right for them at that point in time because they've got other things going on. In Ireland, one of the things that I think we should be very proud of as a nation is that we put our family above business. They don't do that in other countries. They would put the business ahead of their family. And I don't think we should change that. I think that that's important. Time and time again, I mentioned my involvement with Kella, the Female Leadership Network, and I look at the supports for female business leaders, and I think it's excellent. And I look at my own daughter, and I'm like, I'm thinking that if she wants to go into business in the future, I'd like to see her well supported. But there's a challenge there that when smallies arrive, it tends to fall to the female to look after them, and they take that role on. They kind of say, yeah, look, business comes second, I'm looking after the kids first. But as I said, there's other countries where that's not the case. They put the business first, and I don't think that that's right. I think we should follow the Irish way of being, which is family first. So that is a challenge. We need to work out something that fits within that framework in order to help female leaders get into business. So I think like childcare is the biggest issue out there at the moment, and the lack of childcare. Childcare for special needs is also an area that I've recently become aware is a huge issue that's stopping a lot of people following their dreams and stopping a lot of very capable women in particular follow a business idea that's absolutely solid.
Yeah.
So there's supports outside of just funding and grants. I think if we can make the infrastructure, make the ecosystem more favourable to people doing things like that, then I think it'll be more successful than just throwing money at it.
Yeah. There's an overall picture. It's not just money.
Yeah. And I mean, the other thing to bear in mind is like a lot of people are in multinationals and they've great ideas. And in order to follow this great idea, they have to leave the multinational. I'd love to see some sort of a framework where they could take a 2-year leave of absence and have some sort of a stipend from Enterprise Ireland or somebody else within, that gives them a kind of a 2-year window to pursue this. At a very modest kind of stipend. I'm not talking about keeping their multinational salary, but I'm thinking, something where, they can actually...
That they can be viable without...
Yeah, for a 2-year period to follow
creative.
this. And they either, at the end of that 2 years, they either seek and achieve sales or venture capital, or they go back into the multinational. And I think that's an area that would reap a lot of reward. But there's a lot of obstacles to be overcome as well within that concept.
So we're in here in the Monk's Well now, and the whole piece about community and the GA and you as a Quin man, and you nearly have a sense of obligation to the community. I can see that in you. But at the same time, I know you've been very supportive of the community. Had you no fun that you didn't need to go into hospitality and go into the Monk's Well and purchase it and make it into what it is today? As you said a while ago, 3 businesses in one, serving the community and further afield.
Yeah, definitely. Look, it was would have been easier not to do it.
Yeah.
I suppose, we'd been very fortunate, and then I was kind of looking at, the kids coming up behind me, and I wanted to kind of set an example for them, and to do some good. And you know, a very good friend of mine, Ronan Gallagher, Dobby, was egging me on to buy this place and to reopen it. And unfortunately, I texted him and I said, okay, all right, you win. I'm gonna go to the auction. Or it won't become a hostel. I promise you. I'm gonna buy it. And you know, I had the idea that I'd renovate it as a builder's finish and then lease to somebody. That was the idea originally, and it was just about saving it from becoming something that I didn't think was going to be positive for the village or the community. So didn't take much to convince my wife, actually. I think many wives would have gone, I'm sorry, you're doing what now? But no, she understood, and she was like, yeah, no, I think you're doing the right thing. And so Dobby, one of the last text messages I had with him was, you know, I'm going to do this. Like, he died on the Wednesday, and Friday was the auction. So he never knew that I got it. But I think, you know, there's been a lot of luck. We've had an awful lot of luck here during the build, during the renovations, since we opened. Like, there's been a lot of serendipity. Do you know what? I can't help but think that he's up there somewhere, kind of.
He's playing his part somewhere.
He is, yeah. And I mean, even where I'm sitting now, I'm just looking up at the Clooney Quin jersey above, and that's from the intermediate team that he was part of, and he's the only signature missing from that. You know, which I think his absence from that means a lot. But you know, even the stroke of luck we had in getting these timber monks that were sitting, you know, there's 6 of them on the property, like, and that comes down to pure luck and timing again. You know, Jerry Quin from Corofin rang me one day and he was like, look, are you keeping the name? And I was like, yeah, no, we're keeping the Monkswell name. And he was like, great, do you have any interest in 6 monk figurines? You know, and coming from Jerry, you know, I should have expected that they weren't figurines. But they're a super addition to the place, and like, I could give you a long list of serendipity and luck and fortunate circumstances that have followed us since we took on this project. You know, there's been a few unlucky things as well, of course, but like, you know, I think the overwhelming feeling is that a lot of lucky things have happened to us here, and there's a great positive vibe about it, and I think that's in a large part due to Dobby's influence. And I think if you do something for the right reasons, I think ultimately it'll work out, no matter how difficult it is. So I'd like to think that he's looking at me now doing a podcast with his hand in his face, kind of saying, oh my God, what have I created? You know?
And from on that point, does it feel to you that you're keeping your deep connection, childhood connection, alive with Quin, and that, because you've said it already, that you're not hands off here, you are involved, you know, and Diane is involved, and you know, you want your family to be involved long term. It's much more than a commercial venture to you, isn't it?
It is, yeah. No, it's since we started, we always said this was going to be more of a hub than a pub, right? Brilliant. So more of a hub than a pub, and even the lads who worked here were all local lads, like, and they were sick of me. They'd come to me and asking a question, and I'd be just, lads, look, it's going to be more of a hub than a pub, so what are our options? You know, so even the electrician, when he was asking me about sockets and stuff, and I was like, right, so if it's going to be a hub more than a pub, you know, this is probably where the stage is going to be. What kind of sockets am I going to need here? And, you know, that answered the question. You know, if there's a stage, an area for band, music. You know, we talked about even simple things like the lighting, you know. We were going with all just normal pendant lighting like you'd have in a normal pub, but I was like, hang on, this is a community pub. We're going to have table quizzes. You know, people that are going to be going to the table quizzes can't read in dim light. You know, you're talking about that age group, so we need to have spots. Okay, where are we putting the spots? Well, we need to put the spots over the tables where they can read the table quiz. You know, it made decisions very easy. But then when the lads started learning, like, everything from the electrician to the plumber to the carpenters, first fix, second fix, even the guys fitting the bar, the taps, like, you know, from Heineken or Diageo, they were all like, okay, well, if it's going to be a hub more than a pub, and you're going to have parties and events, then you need to do this, you need to do that. And, you know, then that was the same then with the cafe. You know, the cafe is arguably too small, but the reason we made the cafe small was so that it could be viable year round in a small village, not just in the summer period. Do you know, but we have the barn out the side then, so that can cater for kind of private events and private private functions, but also to be an extension of the cafe and of the pub.
It's very much modulated, like.
It is, yeah, and you can have, like, there's nights here when it's quiet and we just have people out the front bar and there's nobody in the back bar, you know, and it's that kind of modularity that allows it to facilitate, or allows it to kind of cater for a community like Quin that goes through busy periods where you've got a county final crowd and the place is just absolutely mobbed, down to the quiet Thursday evening where there's just a couple of ladies in their 80s meeting outside for a scone and a cup of tea. Do you know? So it's kind of, everyone's catered for. At least that was the effort.
It's much needed. Rural Ireland, it's kind of bucking the trend, really, I suppose, of the whole hospitality publican industry has been in decline in rural Ireland. It's great to see fresh money being pumped into it and somebody that actually has a vested interest in the area. To you, that would seem as a natural enough progression, purchasing this and doing that, because I'm getting an idea of the way your mind thinks. But what idea or diversification in the future excites you the most? What direction, like in the morning, you know, what's the one that keeps you up a bit at night with excitement that it's something you could do or might do?
Yeah, so there's two elements to that, I suppose. I have the local community ideas and the Monkswell in one side, and then I'm thinking broader as well. So, like, locally here, I'm very interested in doing something. And again, with the Monkswell, we took a 30-year outlook on this. So we built it and kitted it out in such a way that, you know, for the next 30 years, it shouldn't need much maintenance, much work on it. It's kind of like we rewired, replumbed, rebuilt most of it. Like, you know, it's ready for the long term. But I'd be looking at the Abbey and I'm like, you know, ultimately, if you have, so within the community, there's 17 different individual community groups, and each of them are doing fundraising and doing grants and all the rest of it, to do various projects. Each of them have their own merit, but we have the Abbey across the road, and I always thought that, you know, the community should benefit at large from the Abbey in some way, even if that was to commercialise it in a minor, small way, one that was in keeping with its history, but for the benefits to be shared among the community, so that each of those 17 community groups, you know, would get a share of the benefits of commercialising the Abbey. So I mean, currently there's fundraising going on for the school, you know, whereas, and the community in the street view, and there's heritage projects, there's so many things going on. There's no reason at all that if we had commercialised the Abbey in some small way, that could fund other community projects, could fund things like, you know, playgrounds, astroturf pitches, you know, the list goes on. And it's an asset that I think, done appropriately and done kind of in a right way, I think could be very, very good for the community. So that's one area that I get very excited about. And, you know, obviously there's a lot of connection between the Monkswell and Ballykilty as well, and Ballykilty Manor, and I'd love to see that brought back into some use, you know, for the community, like, you know. So those kind of things, granted there might be more longer term visionary, you know, kind of things, but you have to start somewhere. Aside from that, like, I have started another software company as well, which keeps me awake a lot, and that's Atema, and that's like the next evolution of sustainability reporting. That's some of the people that we've put it in front of, again, they're Fortune 500 companies in pharma and medtech, are saying, they're calling it resiliency software, and it's using AI. And that is very exciting because, well, I'll give you an example. Like the AI tool was spitting out results that was there just after Christmas, and it was drawing attention to the area just off the coast of Venezuela. And we took no notice of it. We were like, oh, the AI is malfunctioning, like it's picking up stuff, it's looking at shipping, trading routes, it's looking at what's happening, what's not happening. And then all of a sudden, then within 24 hours, there was the geopolitical shift over there, you know. The power of AI is never going to be as bad as it is today. Just like, if you absorb that for 1 second, like it's never going to be as bad as it is today. So whatever about thinking about AI in 10 years time, think about it in 50 years time. What's life going to be like then? That keeps me awake at night. Is that a positive? Is that a negative? That keeps me awake.
Do you tend towards optimistic or? pessimism.
I think sometimes things have to get worse before they get better. When you've got large shifts like that, like you look at the Industrial Revolution, things got worse before they got better. This is probably akin to the Industrial Revolution, but it's hard to know. I was involved in a conversation recently between a couple of guys who, they would be considered futurists, let's say, in the US, and they would be far more negative than I would. I think we have, I think there's been enough Hollywood stuff to kind of give us a few warning messages, that used correctly, this stuff can be powerful. Used incorrectly, this stuff can be very dangerous. But it is exceptionally powerful, and I think we're only really scratching the surface at the moment. So that does keep me awake at night. And I often wonder, you talk about legacy for kids and stuff, like, at the moment the biggest problem we have with kids is keeping the phones off them, and taking the phones off them going into school is a great idea, but in 10 years time, where are we going to be at, with AI tools, original thought, art, creativity, where's all that? Is it still going to be very derivative? That's stuff that's coming out of AI, or is it going to go that extra step? I mean, the latest stuff coming out of Silicon Valley, and actually there's a couple of really good companies in Israel, of all places, doing some really fascinating research into AI, where it's not artificial intelligence now; they're considering it sentient intelligence. So it's AI tools training other AI tools to be more like AI, which is frightening. Like just the speed that it's.
Well, the sentience part is the part that's.
Yeah. So I get very nervous when I'm looking at stuff on the media at the moment. About drones that are, they're not being controlled. Most of them are being controlled by a human, but a lot of them could be controlled by AI very, very quickly. And now all of a sudden we're into, a very famous 2-part movie that everyone remembers that then became several parts. I won't even mention it. But I'm talking about Terminator, obviously.
Yeah.
But, certainly hope it doesn't go that way, but it does keep me awake at night.
Do you think at all, are you a person that thinks about legacy? Obviously, when you have kids, it totally changes your outlook on the world. But you've been quite successful, quite young, and you're put in a position, I'm not saying you're put in a position, but you worked hard and you sacrificed for it. You have quite a lot of power in a lot of ways, and you're in a position where you can shape a roadmap for not only your family but your community. Do you think much in terms of your legacy?
No, I'm not an empire builder. I was asked that before, and no, that's not what it's about. It was young. I was 36, I suppose, when I signed the deal. I was 36, but I was moving into a house that we had just built. So literally, actually to sign the deal, it had to be done in old-fashioned. I had to print it and sign it and send it back. Yeah, and I did that at 11:45 at night. But because we were in the process of moving into the new house, the house that we'd been building for the previous year, that actually I had to ask Diana, where's the printer and where do I find ink for it? And I had a team of solicitors on one side ringing me, screaming at me down the phone that this needs to be signed and sent back before midnight Irish time. And I was looking for an ink cartridge. I eventually found the ink cartridge, and then I had to go and find paper and then hook it up to the laptop and actually get this thing printed, then sign it old school, and then scan it and send it back. And so that was interesting. But look, legacy doesn't bother me. I'm not looking for.
Yeah. You're happy to keep creating and keep.
Yeah.
Using the talents you have to innovate.
Yeah, sure. We're only here a small while,
That's all.
I only ever look at it. I'm often joking that I have this target of 84. If I can get to 84, I'm going to be a happy man. So I'm 42 now. I'm halfway there. So I think I've done a lot in the first half. Now I'm into the second half, trying to figure out what I do then.
I think if we asked you at 83, I don't think you'd be happy with the 84 target somehow, Adrian.
Probably not. I think.
Yeah, well, Adrian, look, I just want to thank you for everything you've done for the community, but thank you for the time you've given us. You've been very generous, and best of luck with everything with the Monks Well and all your other ventures.
Thanks very much, Joe. Thanks.
Brilliant.